Imagine waking up in a city where everything feels completely normal. Children are getting ready for school, parents are heading to work, friends are laughing in the streets. An amusement park is preparing to welcome visitors for the first time. The future looks bright, and no one has any reason to be afraid. Now imagine that, just a few days later, the city is completely empty. Not because of war, not because of a natural disaster, not because people chose to leave, but because something invisible had already begun to spread. Something that couldn't be seen, couldn't be smelled, couldn't be heard. Yet it would change thousands of lives forever. This is the true story of a city that was abandoned almost overnight. A place where clocks stopped, classrooms were left exactly as they were, family photographs remained on tables, and children's toys were never picked up again. Even today, decades later, the streets remain silent. Many people call it the Ghost City. But the truth behind that name is even more disturbing than any ghost story. Before we continue, remember that everything you're about to hear is based on real historical events. Some details come from eyewitness accounts, official investigations, and historical records. Where historians disagree or evidence is uncertain, we'll make that clear. Our story begins in the Soviet Union during the spring of 1986. Near the border of modern-day Ukraine stood one of the most advanced nuclear power stations in the country. Just a few kilometers away was a young city built especially for the people who worked there. Its name was Pripyat. Pripyat wasn't old. It was modern, clean, and full of life. Wide streets, apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, cafes, sports centers, and parks made it a place many families were proud to call home. Nearly 50,000 people lived there. Young couples dreamed about their future. Children rode their bicycles through quiet neighborhoods. Workers believed they were helping power an entire nation. To anyone visiting, it looked like a city with a long future ahead of it. No one knew they were living through the final, ordinary day they would ever have in their homes. As the sun began to set on April 25, 1986, life continued as usual. Families ate dinner together. Friends made plans for the weekend. Children fell asleep without fear. Just a short distance away, workers at the nearby nuclear power plant were preparing to perform what seemed like a routine safety test. It had been done before. No one expected it to become one of the worst technological disasters in human history. Within a matter of hours, one small decision would begin a chain of events that no one could stop. And before the next sunrise, an entire city's future would change forever. But what really happened inside that power plant that night? That's where our story truly begins. To understand why the events of April 1986 shocked the world, you first have to understand what Pripyat was. This wasn't an old town filled with abandoned buildings or forgotten streets. It was one of the newest and most modern cities in the Soviet Union. Founded in 1970, Pripyat was built to support the workers of the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant. At the time, nuclear energy was seen as the future, a symbol of scientific progress and national pride. The city grew quickly. Wide, tree-lined streets stretched between rows of apartment buildings. Schools welcomed thousands of children every morning. Hospitals cared for growing families. Parks echoed with laughter, and sports centers stayed busy throughout the week. For many people, Pripyat represented opportunity. The average age of its residents was only around 26 years old. It was a city filled with young engineers, teachers, nurses, construction workers, and families just beginning their lives together. Each morning followed a familiar rhythm. Before sunrise, buses carried workers to the nuclear power plant. Others walked to nearby factories, offices, or schools. Children hurried to class carrying their books, while parents stopped at local shops before heading to work. To an outsider, it looked like any successful modern city. There were cafes where friends met after work, movie theaters showing the latest films, libraries, swimming pools, supermarkets, playgrounds, and music schools. It was a place designed not only for work, but for life. In fact, Pripyat was preparing for a special celebration. Just days later, families were looking forward to the May Day holiday, one of the biggest public celebrations in the Soviet Union. Decorations were already appearing around the city, and excitement was building. One attraction in particular had everyone's attention. An amusement park stood waiting near the city center.
Its bright yellow Ferris wheel had become one of Pripyat's newest landmarks. Children eagerly talked about riding it with their parents. Although the official opening was still days away, many families planned to spend part of the holiday there together. No one imagined that the Ferris wheel would become famous for an entirely different reason. Today, it stands frozen in time, not because it was worn out, but because the people who were supposed to enjoy it suddenly vanished from the city. Meanwhile, only a few kilometers away, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant operated around the clock. It employed thousands of skilled workers whose job was to keep electricity flowing across large parts of the Soviet Union. For most residents, the power plant wasn't something to fear. It was the reason the city existed. Many families depended on it for their livelihood. Parents worked there, friends worked there, neighbors worked there. The reactors had operated for years, and confidence in the technology was high. Life felt stable, safe, predictable. As evening arrived on April 25th, 1986, the streets slowly became quieter. Parents tucked their children into bed. Teenagers gathered with friends, talking about music, sports, and the upcoming holiday. Night shift workers prepared to begin another ordinary shift at the power plant. None of them expected that, within hours, ordinary life would disappear forever. Because behind the walls of reactor number 4, engineers were preparing to perform what they believed would be a routine safety test. It was a test that had been delayed earlier in the day, a test that would soon begin under conditions that were far more dangerous than anyone realized. And once it started, there would be no way to stop what came next. It was just after midnight. Inside reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, the night shift had taken over. The workers weren't responding to an emergency. They weren't trying to stop an accident. Instead, they were preparing to carry out what was supposed to be a routine safety test. The goal sounded simple. If the plant suddenly lost electrical power, could the spinning turbine continue producing enough electricity for a few extra seconds to keep important cooling systems running until backup generators started? It was an important question. To answer it, the operators had to reduce the reactor's power and follow a carefully planned procedure. But the test had already been delayed for several hours. By the time it finally began, a different team of operators was on duty, and the reactor was no longer in the condition the original plan expected. As the power level dropped, something unexpected happened. The reactor became unstable. The operators tried to correct the problem. Controls were adjusted. Systems were changed. Some automatic safety features were disabled so the test could continue. At the time, No one inside the control room believed they were only minutes away from disaster. Everything happened incredibly fast. At 1:23 in the morning, the test finally began. For a few seconds, everything appeared normal. Then the reactor's power suddenly surged. Instead of slowing down, it accelerated violently. The instruments began showing values no one expected. The operators realized something was terribly wrong. One of them pressed the emergency shutdown button, a command designed to stop the reactor immediately. It should have ended the test. Instead, the situation became even worse. Within seconds, an enormous buildup of energy tore through the reactor. A powerful explosion blasted the 2,000-ton concrete and steel lid from the top of the reactor. A second explosion followed. The roof was ripped apart. Chunks of burning graphite and debris were hurled into the night sky. Flames spread across the damaged building. For the first time in history, the core of a large nuclear reactor was exposed directly to the open air. Workers outside the building stared in disbelief. Some thought a transformer had exploded. Others believed it was simply a fire on the roof. Very few understood what they were actually looking at. The reactor itself had been destroyed. Yet the greatest danger wasn't the flames. It was something nobody could see. An enormous cloud of radioactive material was rising into the atmosphere. There was no smell, no warning siren telling the city to run, no visible cloud drifting through the streets. The air looked exactly the same. But with every passing minute, invisible radioactive particles spread farther from the power plant. Inside the station, firefighters rushed toward the burning reactor. They climbed onto the roof to battle the flames. They had almost no idea that many of them were walking into one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. Their training had prepared them to fight fires.
It had not prepared them for an invisible hazard that could not be seen, touched, or escaped, simply by moving away from the flames. While the firefighters worked, the people of Pripyat slept peacefully in their apartments. Parents rested beside their children. Apartment windows remained open to the cool spring air. Not far away, a disaster unlike anything in history was unfolding. Yet almost no one in the city knew it had happened. When the sun finally rose over Pripyat that morning, the streets looked almost unchanged. Buses still followed their routes. People prepared for work. Children got ready for school. To anyone looking outside, it seemed like another ordinary day. But invisible radioactive dust had already begun settling across rooftops, playgrounds, parks, and streets. The danger had arrived long before anyone was warned, and for the thousands of families living just a few kilometers away, time was already running out. As the first light of dawn spread across Pripyat, the city looked peaceful. Nothing seemed unusual. The streets were quiet. Birds sang in the trees. People woke up, made breakfast, and prepared for another normal Saturday. No one could see the danger that had already arrived. Unlike smoke or fire, radiation gave no warning. It had no color, no smell, no sound. It drifted silently through the air, settling onto rooftops, sidewalks, playgrounds, and clothing. Children walked outside on their way to school and weekend activities. Some families opened their windows to let in the cool morning air. Others stood on their balconies, looking toward the power plant. In the distance, an unusual glow could still be seen. Many residents were curious. Some even walked closer to get a better view.
They had no idea that every minute spent outside increased their exposure. Meanwhile, inside the power plant, confusion had turned into panic. The reactor was gone. But many officials refused to believe it. Some insisted that reactor number 4 was still intact. Others argued that the radiation readings had to be wrong. The instruments available could only measure relatively low levels of radiation. When they reached their maximum reading, some officials mistakenly believed the situation wasn't much worse than that. The truth was far more terrifying. The actual radiation levels were so high that many of the meters simply could not measure them. As valuable time slipped away, firefighters continued battling the flames. They climbed across damaged rooftops covered with radioactive debris, unaware of what lay beneath their boots. Several later reported an unusual metallic taste in their mouths. Some began feeling dizzy. Others became weak and nauseous. At first, they believed it was exhaustion from the fire. They kept working. They had answered the emergency call believing they were saving a building. Instead, they had walked into one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. Doctors at the local hospital soon noticed something was terribly wrong. The injured firefighters arrived with symptoms few had ever seen. Their skin became red, as though badly sunburned. Many were vomiting. Some could barely stand. Medical staff worked desperately to help them, not yet realizing that many of the patients had received massive doses of radiation. Outside the hospital, life continued almost normally. Children played in parks. Couples strolled through the city. Buses continued running. Shops remained open. The greatest threat facing the city remained completely invisible. Hours passed, then more hours. Still, no evacuation order came. By afternoon, radiation had spread far beyond the power plant. Scientists and military officials were arriving from across the Soviet Union. One by one, they began to understand the scale of the disaster. This was no ordinary industrial accident. It was an international emergency. If the radioactive material continued spreading unchecked, millions of people could eventually be affected. Finally, officials accepted what could no longer be denied. The people of Pripyat had to leave. But the evacuation would not begin immediately. Instead, residents would spend one more night in the contaminated city, unaware that every passing hour increased the danger around them. The next morning, hundreds of buses would arrive. Loudspeakers would deliver a calm announcement. People would be told to take only essential belongings. They were assured they would return in just a few days. Almost everyone believed those words. Almost everyone left something behind. And almost no one realized they were saying goodbye to their homes forever. On the afternoon of April 27th, 1986, about 36 hours after the explosion, the people of Pripyat finally received an announcement. It came through loudspeakers placed around the city. The message was calm. There was no panic in the official voice. Residents were told that, due to an accident at the nuclear power station, they would be temporarily evacuated as a precaution. They were asked to remain calm, to bring only essential items, some clothing, important documents, a little food. They were told they would be away for only a few days. Most people believed it. Why wouldn't they? No one imagined they would never live in their homes again. Within hours, hundreds of buses began arriving from nearby towns and cities. One after another, they lined the streets of Pripyat. The operation was massive. Neighbors helped elderly residents carry their bags. Parents held their children's hands. Some people locked the doors to their apartments before leaving. Others didn't bother. After all, they expected to return very soon. Many left family photographs hanging on the walls. Dinner plates remained on kitchen tables. Books stayed open where they had been left. Favorite toys waited in children's bedrooms. Pets were left behind because officials believed animals might carry radioactive contamination. For many families, leaving their dogs and cats behind became one of the most heartbreaking memories of that day. As bus after bus pulled away from the city, thousands of people looked back through the windows. Few realized they were seeing their homes for the last time. By evening, Pripyat was almost empty. The streets that had been filled with laughter only a day earlier fell silent. Schools closed. Shops were abandoned. The amusement park, which was supposed to welcome excited families for the May Day celebrations, never officially opened. Its Ferris wheel would become one of the most recognizable symbols of the disaster. But the evacuation of Pripyat was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, thousands more people from surrounding villages and communities were also forced to leave their homes. Entire neighborhoods disappeared from the map. Roadblocks were established. A large exclusion zone was created around the damaged power plant to keep people away from dangerous levels of radiation. Meanwhile, an enormous cleanup effort began. Firefighters, engineers, miners, soldiers, pilots, doctors, and construction workers from across the Soviet Union were sent to help contain the disaster. Many of them knew the risks. Many did not. They worked under extremely difficult conditions to remove contaminated debris, build protective structures around the destroyed reactor, and reduce the spread of radioactive material. Their efforts helped prevent an even greater catastrophe, but many paid a heavy price for their service. The effects of the disaster were felt far beyond Ukraine. Radioactive particles traveled across parts of Europe, where monitoring stations detected unusual levels of radiation. What had begun as an accident at a single reactor had become an international crisis. For the former residents of Pripyat, life would never be the same. Families were relocated to new towns. Children started over in unfamiliar schools. Neighbors who had spent years together were suddenly scattered across different regions. Many carried only a single suitcase. But what they lost could never fit inside one. They lost their homes, their routines, their memories, their community. Years passed, then decades. Nature slowly reclaimed the empty city. Trees grew through cracked roads. Vines climbed apartment buildings. Wild animals wandered streets that once echoed with children's voices. Pripyat had become something almost impossible to imagine. A modern city, frozen in time, waiting silently as though its people had simply stepped outside and never returned. Yet one question still remained. What does this place look like today? And why does it continue to fascinate millions of people nearly 4 decades after the disaster? That is where the final chapter of our story begins. Nearly 4 decades have passed since the explosion. Yet, in many ways, time has never moved forward in Pripyat. Walk through the city today, and it feels as though life simply stopped. Apartment doors remain closed. Classrooms are still filled with dusty desks. Children's toys lie scattered across bedroom floors. Old calendars still hang on walls. Broken windows allow the wind to pass through empty buildings where thousands of people once lived. nature has slowly reclaimed what humanity left behind. Trees now grow through cracked roads. Vines cover apartment blocks. Wild animals roam streets once crowded with buses and bicycles. Without people, the forest quietly returned. For many visitors, the silence is the most unsettling part. There are no crowds, no music, no children laughing, only the sound of the wind moving through empty buildings. It is this silence that earned Pripyat its nickname, the Ghost City. But are there really ghosts here? Over the years, countless stories have spread across the internet. Some visitors claim they heard footsteps inside empty buildings. Others report hearing distant voices, children's laughter, or doors closing by themselves. There are stories of mysterious shadows moving through abandoned apartments. Some even believe the spirits of former residents still wander the city. These stories have inspired books, television shows, video games, and horror movies. But here's what we actually know. There is no verified scientific evidence that Pripyat is haunted. Many reported experiences have ordinary explanations. Old buildings expand and contract with changes in temperature. Loose metal sheets move in the wind. Broken glass echoes through empty hallways. Animals move through abandoned structures. In a place already filled with tragedy, it's easy for the human mind to interpret ordinary sounds as something extraordinary. The real horror of Chernobyl doesn't come from ghosts. It comes from history. It comes from knowing that only days before the disaster, these streets were full of life. Children were riding bicycles. Families were planning holidays. Neighbors were sharing meals together. No one imagined that within hours, everything would change forever. Today, parts of the Chernobyl exclusion zone can be visited with authorized guides. Scientists continue studying how wildlife and the environment have adapted over time. Many areas remain contaminated, while others have become safer than they were decades ago. The damaged reactor itself is now covered by a massive steel structure designed to contain the remaining radioactive material and allow continued research and cleanup. Even after all these years, the lessons of Chernobyl are still being studied around the world, not only by engineers, not only by scientists, but by anyone who wants to understand how a single night changed thousands of lives forever. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of this story isn't the abandoned buildings. It's what they represent. Every empty apartment once belonged to a family. Every classroom once echoed with children's voices. Every photograph left behind belonged to someone who believed they would return in just a few days. They never did. Pripyat isn't frightening because of monsters. It isn't terrifying because of ghosts. It is unforgettable because it reminds us how quickly ordinary life can disappear. One ordinary evening, one failed safety test, one explosion, and an entire city became frozen in time. Thank you for watching. If this story made you think, let me know in the comments. Would you ever visit the Chernobyl exclusion zone to see this place with your own eyes? And if you'd like to hear more true stories that are stranger, darker, and more unbelievable than fiction, consider subscribing to True Curio. Because sometimes, the most terrifying stories are the ones that really happened.